names. One of the things that I did a lot was characters were called Lenny, i.e., Benny, i.e., Susie, i.e., and eventually the publisher was like, what's your problem? Why do people have names like this? Why can't they just have full names like Susan or Joyce? I was just like, oh, I'm sorry. So I went back and I rewrote lots of names, but I kept Nellie, but I spelled it with a Y just to not annoy people. So, my sister's called Nellie, but she's not. My sister, when we were young, my grandmother raised us, and my grandmother was very posh when she was growing up. She did not come from a posh background. She was very working class. She had 8 brothers and 3 sisters, and they lived during the war, and my great grandmother would make giant pots of soup, and people would eat soup all the time because they were so poor, and they lived in a 2-bedroom house with that many people. Can you imagine? But my grandmother grew up with delusions of grandeur. You know, she met my grandfather, and he had a bit of money, so she always felt, you know, I'm posher than this, you know. So she used to speak in a really posh way. She actually got elocution lessons. So when we were growing up, she was very into language and dialogue. And my sister, you know, to get her approval, would start speaking the way Granny speaks. And when we went down to the town, you know, where we lived, it's a small island, and there's a place called the town. So we would go down to the town, and my grandmother's nickname in the town was the Countess. And she absolutely loved it. She was saying, the Countess is coming into town. So my sister really ate into that, and she was like, you know, she'd speak really properly, and it became like a bit of a joke between the family, and listen to Helen speaking, you know. She'd be like, oh, hello, how are you doing? She was like 5. She would speak this way, so it stuck in my brain. So Nellie is like, I embroidered a lot of that into Nellie when I wrote about her. I embroidered a little bit of my sister into her. Otherwise, my sister's read interviews that I've given, and I've said that, and she got really cross with me. But it's the truth. She used to speak like the Queen of England, and we used to laugh at her behind her back. So there's a lot of people. I stole a lot of people's names, you know, from people I know. My grandfather was called Lenny, and he raised us, so I stole that name quite specifically. You know, he was you know, I thought, you know, my grandfather's not here anymore. I'd like to feel him a little bit when I'm writing this, so I called him Lenny after my grandfather. And he cooked. My grandfather cooked like Lenny. He baked like Lenny. He was clever like Lenny. He was caring like Lenny. You know, he was a good man. So I give Lenny my grandfather's name. So, and I also give Nana Lou, the grandmother of Nellie and Marnie, who dies early on in the book. She's my grandmother. There's no even ifing and oohing about that. She's definitely my grandmother, because when she speaks to Nellie, she speaks in a very affluent way, and Nana Lou is my grandmother. So, and she influences the 2 girls, and she makes them feel, or she reminds them to be bigger than where they are, and it, you know, verses them well for the life in front of them. I hope.
Some of the language that you come up with is really funny, but it's also very raw and very, you know, like some of the words that come out of Marnie's mouth. And is that like from people that you've met, or just like, I mean, it's like, wow.
It's definitely the world I belong in, and it's where I've come from, so that is how people talk. But people, like, when the reviews of the book have gone out, people like have responded in terms like on Goodreads and in Amazon. They were like, they felt like they had learned a new language when they finished the book. At the beginning they were like a little unclear about what they were reading, especially with some of the slang words, but by the end of the book they felt they were well versed in Scottish language. They were like, oh, I've been there, I know this world really well. And they do. If they understand that book, then by the end of it they can go to Glasgow and they'll be okay. They'll be fine. But, you know, some people don't like, you know, there's a lot of profanity in the book, and some people don't like it. But I mean, there's profanity within the first 3 pages of the book, and if you haven't sussed it out by then don't read it. That's how I feel about it. But specifically the universe that I come from speaks like that. That's how people speak. And that's how they talk. They say things like fanny bows, and although some people are like, what does that actually mean? What is she talking about? But
But
was-
it makes it enjoyable to read. I mean,
Sorry?
it's fun to read. I mean, you feel like you're right there.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, in this world.
Yeah, I hope people feel like they're in that world. I certainly wanted to immerse them in that, so I didn't pull any punches. I didn't skirt around any issues. I didn't skirt around any vocabulary. I just threw it right in there and see. And remember, they cut a lot of stuff, so you can only imagine what it looked like in the first draft.
Right.
It's been censored already, if you can believe it.
Did you or your publisher think of adding a glossary at the end or on your website?
I don't know, but I think it's a really good idea. You know what? That's a great idea for my website, a glossary. That's a brilliant idea.
I've read other Scottish books, and man, they send me to the big dictionary. Like if you read Tunes of Glory, I didn't know what truths were. You know, I mean, you assume that Americans know, all Americans know of Scottish culture as, you know, tossing a caber in pipe bands, or maybe they've seen some of the rotten movies about the. Speaking of movies, the UK lottery might fund your movie, right?
I don't know. A book like this has to be picked up by a producer, and then a producer goes and gets the money from whoever they can extract it from. So, I mean, there's been some interest in it already, but we'll just have to see what happens.
It would have to be shot in Scotland, don't you think? Or not?
I think it would have to be shot in Scotland. I mean, but then nothing based in Scotland is shot in Scotland, which is interesting, and nothing in New York is shot in New York. It's shot in Scotland, which is really bizarre. So what's that movie? I can't remember. It was all shot in Glasgow. Who's that girl that used to be in the X-Files? Gillian. She was in this great period piece, and all the period exteriors were shot in Glasgow, and some of the scenes with the characters were shot in Glasgow, because apparently all the Glasgow tenements, all the architects of the Glasgow tenements went to New York and designed the same kind of tenement because they were having a housing problem with overpopulation. So they had this idea of building people, like housing people on top of one another, which is why the tenement came about. So we have the original tenements. They shot it in Glasgow. I wish I knew what the film was. House of, can't remember. It doesn't matter. But I don't know if they would shoot it in Scotland. Braveheart was shot in Ireland.
House of Mirth. House of Mirth.
House of Mirth.
Yes,
that's right.
that's
That's what it was.
Yeah.
That was shot in Glasgow.
Eve Morton, we were just talking about her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. It was shot in Glasgow. And Braveheart was shot in Ireland.
A little bit in Scotland.
A little bit in Scotland. That's true. That's true. A little tiny bit. Because they couldn't find grand spaces of land where they didn't have telephone poles, so except in Ireland. So they shot in Ireland, and some bits of it were in Inverness. But yeah, I see it. I see it shot in Scotland. Ideally, I'd like it shot in Scotland. And I really love this director called Jim Sheridan. He did My Left
That
Foot
is good.
and Made in America. He's brilliant, and he's like got a real way with unknown talent, young talent. He's just got like a great way, and I just love his voice. I think it's amazing.
Have you sent him your book?
Sorry,
Have you sent him your book?
I would love to send him.
You should send it.
Should send it to him.
Send it
Yeah,
on.
read my book. He's so great though. He's such a great director.
So we're an independent bookstore here, and we're thrilled to have an author like you. We always have to ask, what are your favorite books, and what are you reading right now?
I'm reading tons of things right now. I actually got The Night Circus out. I hear it's brilliant. So I bought The Night Circus, and I also bought, and I only bought them last week, and I bought them in Vromans, where we were last week, and A State of Wonder,
Uh-huh.
which I hear is amazing. But the books that I've read this year that I really loved was Light Between the Oceans, Between an
How
Ocean.
is that?
It's supposed to be
Oh,
amazing.
goodness.
I'm halfway through that, and The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold
Isn't that a
Flynn.
wonderful
It's
book?
so great.
Love it.
It's so fantastic.
That's the one that you couldn't
And my
remember.
friend wrote a
Yeah.
book, which I'm not plugging, but she did write a book, and I did an event with her at the Edinburgh Festival, and they said, you're two are together because you have books that are quite similar, sort of working class background movies, sorry, we've been talking about movies, books, and it said, Tony Hogan bought me an ice cream float and then stole my ma. That's the title of her book, and I read her book and it just blew me away. It's absolutely amazing. It's such a great book,
Is it
and I really
available
like.
here?
Sorry,
Is it available on the air?
it's available now.
What's the title again?
It's called Tony Hogan bought me an ice cream float and then stole my ma. So it's a great title, isn't it? I really like Helen Fitzgerald, who's done Dead Lovely. She's not in America yet, but I really recommend her. She's like The Donor, Dead Lovely, just great books. They're really great. I love Sarah Waters. I love her. She's so great. The Night Watch, Fingersmith. They're great books. And I love John Irving, but who doesn't love John Irving? I really like, my favourite book in the whole world is Geek Love by Kathleen Dunn, and The Unbearable Lightness of Being.
Oh, I love that one.
I just love that book. It's so great. Everything's so great. I haven't had a chance to read in such a long time, so I've got a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I'm doing this, so it's been absolutely all-encompassing. But I'm travelling on flights a lot at the moment, so I've had a chance to actually look at a book, and I'm actually one chapter into State of Wonder, which I think is amazing. So it's such a great book. It's so beautifully written. I just can't stop turning the pages, and then the flight docks and I have to, and picking it up again is just. I'll be doing that this weekend, plenty of that this weekend.
So how long has your book been published in the UK?
It's been published in the UK since since March last year, and it's just been published in the US 2nd of January.
Right.
So.
And was it on their bestsellers list? And it sounded like it has done really well over there.
Yeah, it was well received. It was critically received, and people bought it, and everybody loved it. And I got 5 stars on the UK sites. Everybody loved it, but it didn't sell as well as it could have. And I was really lucky that they picked it up in America, and Americans have responded amazingly to it. I think it's because you're all secretly Scottish. That's why. I think you're all secretly immigrants. You're all Irish. You're all Scottish. And you all came here. You're running away from us, and we cut up with you. So you respond to that in our literature. So yeah, it's doing well here.
Yeah.
I'm really pleased.
When you read people's postings on Amazon, for example, or
Do I read them?
when you read, does it surprise you what they respond to? Does it surprise you what they respond to?
Yeah, they say lovely things. When they say mean things, they say really mean things. But hopefully, gladly, nobody said too many mean things. But they respond to things that I wouldn't have thought about. Like,
Right.
they talk a lot about obviously the dysfunction of families, a theme in The Death of Bees. But there was one comment about monsters in one of the blogs, actually, which was actually reviewing the book, and they had a whole take on monsters.